Today we have the pleasure of having Ashantae Green join us, who is running for Duval Soil and Water, as we prepare a conversation on conservation within District 4. And I will throw to Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tabitha, for getting us started. And I am so grateful to have Ashantae here to speak with us about conservation and resiliency in the city of Jacksonville. I'm sure, as we are all aware, resiliency and conservation have almost become buzzwords in politics, right? We hear a lot of politicians speaking about it and speaking to it. So I'm extremely gracious that we have an actual subject matter expert on something like this to inform us and educate us. So let's start with just describing what resiliency and conservation is, right? So resiliency is the city's ability to bounce back from natural and man-made disasters. And we speak a lot about conservation because, in the city of Jacksonville, we are so lucky to have a varied space, right? We've got spaces on the water, we've got spaces in town, and we want to conserve those green spaces and also make sure that we are developing them and supporting them for future development, such as homes or businesses and things like that, but also, being responsible in the decisions that we make to not only boost the future of our district and our city, but also the future of our economy and our development and all of those things. So, I know that if you're anything like me, you start to focus on those bigger races, such as presidency and state rep and Senate and all of those things. But right here, right now, soil and water is a very important part to the overall health and resiliency of Jacksonville. Last week we spoke about claims, flooding and insurance. I believe it was there's so many I can't even remember, but I believe a couple of weeks ago we spoke about that, and we spoke about how we were looking at floodfactor.com and seeing the sea levels rising, and being in the middle of a storm season, and all of those things that kind of come into play when we talk about conservation and resiliency. And specifically in District 4, within the next 30 years, we're supposed to have flooding expectations increase by 15%. That is a huge number. If you're not familiar with District 4, our boundaries are about University to Atlantic and a little bit south of Kernan and JTB. And in between that, we've got properties in Lovegrove and Riviera right on the water. We've got, divisions like mine. I'm in a multi-family complex. I'm in a condominium complex right in the center where, I'm next to the Southside corridor, where we discussed in that previous town hall the drainage issues that we continue to see in the district. So, this is important. It's not only important to the residents, but it's important to our business community, and it's important to Jacksonville as a whole and its holistic health as a city. I've been tuning into city council meetings and subcommittee meetings, and one of the ones that was recently formed is the Resiliency Committee, which Ashantae is a subject matter expert on. And they mute my mic, so I can't really tune in, but I listen and I hear all the things that they're up to. And one of the bigger things that they've been speaking of is actually hiring a chief resiliency officer. And when I actually heard that, I did some research, and a lot of major cities already have that in place. Chicago has one, Miami has one, and with Jacksonville continuing to grow as an urban and metropolitan area, I think it's great that we're investing in that kind of resource. The budget was just recently passed, and I know there's about $300,000 to actually fund a resiliency department, to continue these efforts and really impact us, and making sure that we are taking the precautions and the measurements to make sure that we're safe. And and again, back to the budget, $240 million is going to be dedicated to capital infrastructure improvements, and I hope to see some improvements in drainage and flooding along that side as well. So we're really seeing how impactful this is in the midst of a pandemic and in the midst of a storm season. As you know, hurricane season starts in the summer and goes into the fall. So this is something that should be at the forefront of all of our minds as homeowners with our hurricane insurance and our homeowners insurance, but also when we're looking at the spaces in our community is what can we keep green and what do we need to think about when we're looking at development. Most recently, I was at off of Newton Road across from Jacksonville Housing Authority, and they have cleared over 13 acres of land. And there's just all this soil and all of this land that has been cleared that, the clearing manager didn't know what it was going to be up to in our district. But just actually seeing that wide space of land and saying like, okay, well, the decisions that we make of what we're going to put here, is it going to be resilient? Is it going to be something that preserves our community? Is it going to be a space that our community is accessible to and can use as part of our conservation efforts? So I'm really excited to have Ashantae and to speak about resiliency and conservation. And we want to stay here and we want to live here. I know Ashantae and I are both young people that I haven't quite developed my family as much as she has, but she has a husband and a child that, she's thinking about these kinds of things. And, she even mentioned to me the other evening on our phone, like, hey, if you feed tap water to your dog, like, be mindful. And like, I'm like, oh my God, my dog, like feeding tap water, I don't, but like just even the thought of those things that we are not aware of or a forefront at the thought of. So I'm really excited to have her. And, Ashantae, I'd love to just talk to you about resiliency, why it's important, and then we can kind of get into a little bit of Q&A from comments online as well as in our Zoom platform. So I'm going to toss it to you, Ashantae.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you, Nicole. And I had the pleasure of speaking to some people on the South Side in regards to their concerns with the increased development and resiliency. So like she said, I am Ashantae Green, and I am a subject matter expert for the Jacksonville City Council Subcommittee on Resiliency. I advise on environmental planning subcommittee, as well as the community outreach subcommittee. So like she said, resiliency is very important because it's your ability to bounce back after a stressor. That could be a hurricane, that could be flooding, that could be fire, it could be a lot of things. But because we live in Florida and we're prone to hurricanes, and we actually get the most rainfall here in the state than anywhere else, rainy day flooding is something that we need to prepare for. So right now we are talking a lot about how we can improve our infrastructure to prepare for a better outcome than what we experienced during Irma. As you know, that Irma was one of the most expensive hurricanes that we had to come back from, especially here on the First Coast. So your day-to-day when it comes to resiliency, all of the flooding that we face all on the South Side, the North Side, everywhere it's something that we should care about when we're talking about resiliency. So on the subcommittee, we're talking about different ways to address flooding specifically through infrastructure. And for me, I am a big advocate for green infrastructure and using green space and trees to combat flooding. One thing about trees, if you use trees appropriately for flooding, they will absorb the water as opposed to displacing it. So green space is the best thing we can do. In regards to some of the things that the city is currently doing, I encourage everyone to, like Nicole does, is to come to the subcommittees and really listen to what we're talking about. They are open to the public, and community outreach and education is going to be one of the main things. So we can go ahead and start talking about questions. I love to answer questions.
Yeah, so I kind of had one in particular. I was, about a month ago, I was part of the downtown council of the Jacks Chamber meeting, and they had a guest talking about the Jacksport dredging, and the question came up about it being environmentally responsible and friendly. And again, I'm not a subject matter expert, but I have been hearing in recent news articles about it building back this or creating an economy of jobs and of more access for our overseas and water transportation and containers and all of those things. So I just personally had a question on your thoughts about the Jacksport dredging. We know it's approved, we know what's going to happen. But being an environmentalist and being someone involved so closely to that subject, what was that process like for you? Were you involved in that? What are your thoughts about Jacksport dredging? That thing.
Yeah, very good question. So, since the dredging is approved, I am working with some of the other green organizations to definitely shift the conversation to mitigation and preparation. So for me, I look a lot at the science and the impact of the environment and the economy. So for me, I'm someone that understands the importance of the environment and the economy. And someone that's working in green construction, I do understand the desire to expand. However, as we move forward, since it is approved, we have to understand how we are going to move forward with maybe adjusting to some of those living shorelines and green spaces, because dredging the St. Johns River to the depths of 40 to 47 feet, as estimated, will bring sea level rise higher. And it will also bring in some of the seawater from the ocean, and that will affect the ecosystem in the river and a lot of the sea life that keeps the biodiversity balanced. So my opinion is we need to be mindful of the environment and really listen to the studies and the data that is out there, because sea level will rise. We will start to see more water come in, and we need to be mindful of some of those shoreline facing communities to make sure that we have infrastructure in place when the water comes in.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I often hear a lot about, the St. Johns River, and I know the St. Johns River Keeper is, a big resource here. And what a lot of people don't realize, that in District 4, we have an area called Riviera Manor, which is right on the water by
Yes.
Pottsboro. And in that Love Grove area, almost, I don't, not necessarily directly across, but in that same vicinity as Love Grove Elementary. And we were actually dropping over there a little bit before the primary election. And, all this waterfront property, right? And then we also spoke about it in our flooding and insurance town hall. But we have a lot of creeks and waterways in the city. And, I know
a lot.
a huge part of Jacksonville, but there are smaller and various creeks and waterways. So how do we as a community begin to understand where those are, what those look like, and how we can get involved in the preparation and preservation of those communities and our waterfront properties?
Yeah, very good question. So I oftentimes let people know that our leading economic driver in the state of Florida is tourism. So when people think about tourism in Florida, you think about Disney World and theme parks, but in reality, Florida has a massive draw for environmental tourism and even agro-tourism. People come here for water sports, for the beaches and for the waterways. So if we don't do our part to keep it clean and healthy, people will not come here. So I always encourage anyone that loves natural resources and loves the economy boost that we get from them to tap into the many local organizations that they do a great job to educate and advocate for them. Like you said, like the St. Johns River Keeper, and Resiliency Jacks is a great organization that just started. So I would say do your part, even the big and the small things, to make sure that you are being mindful of pollution and contamination, because we are on a watershed, and a lot of the water that comes from the streets into the storm drain, a lot of people assume that that water gets treated before it goes into the St. Johns River or the different tributaries. Some of it goes straight into the river. So it's important to do our part as citizens to make sure that we are not littering, and that we do the absolute best we can to make sure the things that are used on our lawns is plant-based, and we're not adding to the nutrient pollution that goes straight into the river. And that's important because 48% of people in our area receive water directly from the aquifer. And when the contaminants that come from our soil, from pollution in different areas, and it gets into our waterways, that is something that we are drinking. So let's be very mindful of all of those things, because it impacts our health and it impacts the economic benefits we get from tourism and the beauty and the bounty of Duval County.
You know, I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but Joyce Morgan, Councilwoman Joyce Morgan, actually steers the Resiliency Subcommittee on Jacksonville City Council. And you know, if we take that on a larger scale, we have State Agricultural Commissioner Nikki Freed, and she back in 2019 actually appointed a water policy director
Yep.
because the health and the lack of resiliency that we were not seeing in Florida's water system, and in particularly Northeast Florida on the First Coast. And it just want to take a minute. There was a great quote in here that I found. Okay, so there was a decrease in actually the amount of funding for helping water efficient and reducing technologies back in 2019-2020 budget. So it decreased from 5 million to 4 million, so $1 million less in the overall budget. And that was in 2019. That was the approved 2019-2020 budget. And with Hurricane Irma, I think we all in every city kind of reevaluated where we kind of need to bring in some reinforcements when we talk about our resiliency in terms of water and flooding. And you know, we're seeing that on a state level, and we're seeing it a little bit on a local level. But at a community level, what are, you know, things that people can do to be more cognizant of the things that we just simply don't know, right? You know, we see things come and go. We see development projects here and there, but what are the questions that we should be asking that are integral to responsible development and conservation and our resiliency? Because we can't put it all on this subcommittee to navigate. And you know, by the way, like being in those committees, there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of acronyms.
Yes.
And you know, I was so grateful last week someone brought up that no one knows these acronyms. So, you know, they're talking about doing a newsletter for people, a newsletter with you kind of down what they're up to. And I was so grateful when she said we need to elaborate on the acronyms, because I was like, child, I don't know these acronyms. Y'all saying all these things that I don't know, but I know they're important. And, you know, as in the I want to be involved and I want to make a difference, because I've seen where I've lacked, right? I've seen where I wasn't uneducated about something. So now my focus is, how can I be more educated and how can I help educate people? So is that something that you can speak to a little bit?
Yes, exactly. So when the Chief Resiliency, when the Subcommittee on Resiliency was formed, it was chaired by Matt Carlucci. Now it's chaired by Councilwoman DeFore. And that subcommittee is broken up into 3 subcommittees. It is a subcommittee on infrastructure, which is chaired by Garrett Dennis, as you know. And then there's a subcommittee on environmental planning. That one is chaired by Matt Carlucci, which I'm on that one. And infrastructure, you know, just backing it up a little bit, the infrastructure subcommittee looks at how the infrastructure decisions, the CIP, which is the capital improvement projects, and how all of that goes into making sure we're allotting money to the community and the areas that need improvement to mitigate some of the flooding issues we have. And then the environmental subcommittee is working to make sure that resiliency is addressed in a way that is going to be positive to the environment, and that we are looking at different ways to address some of those resiliency concerns. So that subcommittee is broken up into subcommittees. And the one I am on, a lot of people don't think about it because we live in Florida, but when we're talking about resiliency, a stressor is fire and extreme heat. And a lot of people say, we're in Florida, it's hot everywhere. But oftentimes I tell people that we have some heat disparities throughout the communities due to environmental issues. So I grew up on the east side. There are parts of the east side and north side that is 10 degrees hotter on the same summer day due to the fact of there's a weak tree canopy. When they developed the area, they pretty much deforested everything, and there is not trees to shield from the sun and to absorb some of the pollution. So as citizens, when we are developing areas, it is our due diligence to make sure we are talking to developers and making sure that they are replanting and being mindful of the tree mitigation ordinance that we have. And then when we move on to the next subcommittee that is chaired by Joyce Morgan, that one is on community education and outreach. And that subcommittee, the purpose of it is to disseminate information and to bring all of the information from those two subcommittees down to layman's terms without the acronyms to make sure that everyone understands what we're doing, why you should care, and what you can do about it. So we will be sure to drop the link to those subcommittees so you can tune in. But as citizens, I would definitely encourage you to just understand that flooding is something that impacts all of us, rainy day, hurricane, or not. And just to know that your city officials are working to bring some solutions, and we want to hear from you, so just be engaged citizens, ask questions to make sure that we are being mindful of flooding, that we are being mindful of the environment, and just doing things to make sure that every community is taken care of.
Yeah, I love that you said that because it is every committee or every community. I tend to hear that sometimes the South Side doesn't really have a lot of the issues that other parts of town have, and that's simply false. There are struggles, and they're the same struggles. May the scale be different, absolutely, but there are definitely the same struggles, and I think from a historical standpoint, when we look at consolidation in Jacksonville, I'm going to drop a plug here. A Quiet Revolution is a great book to kind of dive into the understanding of consolidation. The most recent one has a foreword by a local Chris Hand, and it is just a powerful book about how consolidation has impacted our structure in the city. And from a soil and water standpoint, as we've seen, the northwest quadrant of Jacksonville, since consolidation has not gotten the attention and encouragement and empowerment and support as other parts of the city have. And I know Matt Carlucci spoke, very highly of making sure that those in need, that quadrant, that those communities in need get those improvements, first and foremost, because outright it's kind of owed to them. There's been a lack for so long, and on the flip side of the coin, being on the south side of Jacksonville, I call it a hustle and bustle, right? We've developed the town center, and we've developed our Southside business corridor, and now we're starting to see some of the ramifications of that in our environment. And I looked over the budget that was passed, and seeing that 240 is a great start. And I think even the Florida Times Union said that it's a great start, but there still has to be more done. Of course. And for those of you that may not be as familiar, gosh, Ashantae, correct me if I'm wrong, about 50 years ago, consolidation? It's been 50 years, maybe?
Just about.
Just about 50 years. And it's, and again, I'm not a subject matter expert, but A Quiet Revolution is a great read to kind of lean into what consolidation is and how it's affected present Jacksonville today. And for someone that is familiar with the soil and water and environmental aspect of Jacksonville, do you mind sharing your thoughts on how consolidation has affected us?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I like the point that you said that it's literally everywhere. because oftentimes the communities that have the most repeating visible issues get a lot of the conversation. So when we're talking about consolidation, even down to development of communities and even down to redlining, the choices of where to place things and how to develop things goes into the day to day of how your family and your life is impacted. So specifically, looking at Jacksonville and the status of the soil and water, we actually have some of the highest rates of contaminated soil and water and air in the entire state of Florida. Specifically, Jacksonville has been identified as an EPA target community for environmental justice because we have a lot of those.
Break down EPA for those that might not
Oh,
know.
I'm sorry, you guys, with the acronyms. It's the Environmental Protection Agency. They are the pretty much the keepers of the environment, and they create the policies as well as issue funding to address some of the issues facing environment, down to soil, water, air, and even noise pollution. And we have a branch of the EPA here. The Environmental Protection Board is here in Jacksonville, and they are working when we're talking about soil and water contamination. They issue money to remediate soil in different areas. We do have some different factories or plants that started during consolidation, and now communities are feeling some of the health effects of some of the contaminated soil, water, and air because of that. So the EPA is the organization that makes those laws and also mediate some of those issues because of the environmental impacts. And then you should really care about your soil and water because all over the Jacksonville, we have some of the higher rates of asthma. And we have some other diseases that impact just about everyone where you are. And if you're drinking water that is contaminated, or you're in soil that in some areas actually have high rates of lead and arsenic and different parts of the state from the fire, also had some ash in their soil as well. So a lot of those things are being addressed, but I always encourage citizens to look into the map of the brownfield sites that we have around the city. And what brownfield sites are is sites that were previously used for some type of industrial or chemical process, and it's contaminated and it has to be remediated before you can, supposed to be remediated before you can build and live on it. But there are still sites all around the city that that have some of that contamination that has yet to be addressed. We even had a school and some parks on contaminated sites that children were going to. So it's very unfortunate, but there's work being done right now. But I always encourage citizens to look up the brownfields map in the city just to know where they are relative to you, especially if you are having some of those health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that it's important that we plug some local resources, right? First and foremost, your city council representative would be more than aware of what's going on in your immediate community. And I just use Pottsburg Creek as such an example because it's a beautiful area, and it's a creek that where we see the water levels rise and fall, and so I would say first and foremost your city council person, and then like Ashantae said, please tune into these committee meetings. When I started tuning into some of these things, I was like, I have no idea about what's going on, but the least that I can do is sit here and absorb, right? I can be a sponge to educate myself. And it is really, truly helpful. And I can assure you, you're not going to be called on about anything, but I mean, having people from the St. Johns River people and NEFRC, give these presentations about water and resiliency in the community are
the North Florida Regional Council is that acronym.
There you go. I just typed it out. But you know, being involved in hearing those conversations are important because it
Yeah.
makes you feel as if that if there's nothing else that you can do, taking this one step of education is empowering and powerful.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Resiliency Jacks and the local Sierra clubs as well.
Yep.
And I think great leader and Commissioner Nikki Frieda about kind of steering the state on a level of preserving our
Yes.
agriculture and water and soil. And I'm sure you can speak to this better than I do, but we've got so many resources in Florida from farms and at a local level. There's
Yeah. So there's
farms and all of those amazing
it's
things.
300. Yeah, it's actually we have a census of agriculture every 5 years. The last census was done in 2017, and they have identified that there's 366 farms in Duval County,
That's
and
amazing.
90% of them are families. So it's very important to plug into the local agriculture and support them, because not only does it benefit the environment, it benefits the economy, and it keeps money locally. I often tell people one of the easiest things you can do for the environment, for people and planet, is to shop local and support local. And then just two last points for something you said earlier. I just realized I didn't talk much about the newsletter. For those of you that aren't kind of sitting into the subcommittee meetings, we are working to publish a newsletter that will come out, as well as a series of workshops that will be released next year due to some grant funding we received, the subcommittee received. So stay tuned. There will be some resources that you can sign up for to receive that newsletter and kind of get a breakdown of what everyone's talking about. And the last point, the Department of Agriculture is such a great resource. Nikki Fried has done a great job to get some great initiatives together. And Duval Soil and Water Conservation District, what I'm running for, is actually nested in with the Department of Agriculture. So Soil and Water, the board does more than just soil and water. It's also a connection for local landowners and users, which is everyone, to get resources for erosion issues, for education, as well as to who wants to garden or how to support local farmers. So that's the position, and it's pretty holistic, and it's beneficial to everybody.
Yeah, and really fast, we have a question from Susan Miller that I'd like to get to. Tabitha, do you have that, or we can unmute Susan to speak? We're on Zoom stream on Facebook, so if you have anything you want to drop, please drop on our Facebook, and we'd be happy to answer it. Do I have Susan? Are you on? Susan's unmuted. Susan, go ahead and ask your question if you don't mind.
Well, it was kind of a large question. I live on the south side, and I live close to Pottsburg Creek. I was wondering if any of this dredging that they're talking about doing to the St. Johns River would affect Pottsburg Creek. Are they talking about doing these smaller creeks too? Because I have had, since 2014, I've had 3 floods on my property where part of my house was flooded.
Oh my goodness.
And it's all related to the rising of the creek level.
Yeah.
I have heard through neighbors that the creek was dredged probably in the mid 80s, 1980s, and has not been done since. I moved here in 1992, and it has nothing's been done to the creek. So the creek, because of all of the frequent storms we have, nor'easters, tropical storms, it has lost all of its banks, which is what held the creek back from the properties that are on the creek or near the creek. So we have constant floods. Just today, with the light rain we have and with the high levels of the creek, the water level has started creeping up into my backyard. So all of this is affecting our neighborhood here. It's considered Sans Souci. When they're still allowing a lot of new builds in this area, and all of that is draining into the creek. There is a new one on Parental Home Road. There's one on Hogan Road. We certainly have felt the effect since the building of the town center, even though you don't think that it's close to where you live, but it affects the creek levels. Just with the nor'easter last week, as I went past the Humane Society on Southside Boulevard, I noticed the creek had completely overflowed its banks there, and the boat ramp was completely underwater. Some of the businesses adjoining that boat ramp are completely underwater. So, I mean, this is just something we didn't see years and years ago. So the other concern is the environmental impact on the creek. When we have these storms, frequently we lose power. There's 2 pumping stations on my street. And I know for a fact that when the power goes out, those pumping stations go out, and they have on occasion just dumped raw sewage into the creek. So it's a multi-layered question.
Yeah.
When I have called about it, I have called Scott Wilson's office. They're always very polite and try to be helpful. They say call the city. I called the city. The city basically says we can keep the street drains open, but we can't do anything else. Call St. John's Water Management. Well, I call them. They don't even return my calls. So, what do I do?
Yeah. Ashantae, if you don't mind, I think we should double team this. I'm going to talk about it from a residency and policy point, and then if you don't mind tagging in on an environmental and actual fact of dredging point.
Gotcha.
So I live near Grove Park, and so I'm extremely familiar with that area, and I can speak to exactly what you have seen and what you've experienced. What I can say is that I'm not an expert, which is why I have Ms. Green. But what I have noticed is a extreme lack of drainage in our community, and a lack of not maintaining like you said, speaking to the 80s and the dredging in the 80s, not maintaining the improvements that were made to actually support the residents. So that is what I've noticed from a residency standpoint. What I can say from a policy standpoint is that I would love to do exactly what you're talking about, is actually understanding and getting a hold of how we can continue to make sure that this creek and all of the surrounding waterways in Jacksonville are supported on a regularly scheduled maintenance program to make sure that residents are not incurring flooding 3 times a year. I mean, that just breaks my heart to hear flooding 3 times a year. I can't imagine the hoops you've gone through with insurance and the hoops you've gone through with all of the other things to get that resolved. So for that, I feel for you and I apologize for that. And one of the things that I would like to see is a true maintenance schedule and a true update to residents of how we're working to make sure that we're not experiencing that for a lot of people all of the time. I mean, face it, we live in Florida. It can be the middle of summer and it's going to rain, and we're going to have a rainy season in spring. So like, what are we doing as a city to make sure our residents are safe? And like you said, Ms. Miller, that is so important. And what I will say is I don't know what that answer is. From a policy standpoint, I know what I would like to see. And that's why I have Ms. Green. And, Ms. Green, can you educate not only Ms. Miller, but also me on what that process looks like? Do we need to request dredging services? How do we ensure that we're maintaining these creeks and waterways so that they are more of a benefit to the community and not a pain point?
Yeah, very good question. So in regards to the dredging, I am very familiar where the creek is located, and the current plan for the dredging is for 13 miles of the dredging to take place between from where the Danes Point Bridge is to Blunt Island, and 13 miles deep in 40 to 47 feet will bring in a lot more water from the ocean. So it is anticipated for there to be, like I said, increased salt water coming into the river and feeding into the creeks and waterways. So there is an anticipation for more flooding to take place, which is why, like I said at the earlier part of the call, the mitigation plan needs to be a lot more adequate than, in my opinion, than it currently is, because not only will more flooding take place, we need to, as citizens and people that know and truly care, we need to really come together to advocate with those organizations that are. So I would encourage everyone that truly cares about this to team up with St. John's Riverkeeper, who has a great webpage that I can drop the link to later that talks about the St. John's River proposal for the dredging and what needs to be done to mitigate the effects, because not only will the salt water come in, just to let you guys know, when salt water comes in, the current pH and salinity of the river is where it needs to be for the current life that is there. So not only the creatures, but the vegetation and the trees that mitigate some of the current flooding that is there. And then not only will it bring in water, it will also affect some of the flooding in low-lying areas, because the water that comes off of those creeks and tributaries, like we're already in Florida, we're kind of below sea level as it is. We have to make sure that we are planning for how to power those pumping stations and how to make sure that we aren't dumping more toxins and pollutants into the air, into the water, because anytime there is an increased amount of pollution into the water, that is something that adds to the algae blooms, which is very, very harmful for the fish. A lot of people depend on fish to eat, you know, and it's not a good thing to have those green and the blue algae. It's not good for people that are swimming, people that are out there, and algae could really dangerously poison and affect some children and people if they're in the water. So I would just encourage everyone, since it is past, we really need to talk about technology as well as the use of green infrastructure to mitigate some of the effects that we know are coming, and to align with some of those organizations that cares, and they have a whole roster of subject matter experts that do this work every day, and they're looking at the reports that the Army Corps of Engineers has produced, as well as work of the water management districts and everything. So one last point I wanted to bring up based on what you said: if you see any issues when it comes to contaminated water in your area, you are recommended to report it to the St. John's Riverkeeper. They will be on. Whoever needs to hear about that on your behalf, you could snap a picture and send it to them. But also the Florida Fish and Wildlife is another organization that is very, very mindful of the impacts of pollution when it comes to developments as well. So yeah, connect with the St. John's Riverkeeper. They are local and they're really out here advocating, and they have a lot of education that you can read no matter where you are, and understand the impacts, the benefits, and what we need to do to mitigate it.
Yeah, and you know, Ms. Miller, what I will say is, as someone that frequently visits these committees, as you registered through Zoom, we do have your email, and if you don't mind, what I will do is I will send you an email when I actually email the committee and ask when they're next talking about this, and how I can get some more information. And if you want to tune into that, I'd be happy to have you, but I will take that email from your Zoom registration if you don't mind.
That's fine.
And try to keep you as plugged in as possible, because I would like to have an answer about that as well. And thank you so much for posing, Ms. Miller. So Ashantae, thank you so much for joining. I know we're coming up on about 50 minutes having this town hall, and the conversation was lovely, and I'm excited to continue to work with you in a professional capacity, you know, as I continue the stint for City Council District 4. And I will turn it back over to Ms. Tabitha to wrap us up.
Thank both of you ladies again. Thank you, Ashantae, for joining us. It was great information. And this is what it looks like to make sure that you are partnering with other people, you know, across the aisle or sitting next to you to continue to push not only our district forward, but Jacksonville forward. We invite you to continue to learn more about how Nicole plans to help District 4 and what her plans are by visiting NicoleHamm.com. We always need additional people to join our team, help us push the message, and volunteer with us. Whether that means dropping lit with us or phone baking from home, we can always use an extra hand and look forward to your support as we head into this continuous election season. And if you visit NicoleHamm.com, you will see a form there where you can ask additional questions. If you have more questions about today's topic or any of our previous topics, feel free to go back to our Facebook page and look at our past topics. And we hope you guys have a great week.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you for having me.